Today I'm going to teach you how to do the quick threading method. And so in my previous video, I taught you how to thread a serger from scratch, and that's why I have 4 different colors, but most often you will have 4 of the same colors. So I'm going to switch my threads to black. And so when I do this, or if you wanted to switch it from any other color, you just simply take your snips and clip them at the back end here. And so I'm going to clip all 4 of my threads away here, and so that these will come off, but I have tails hanging down. Okay, and so then I'm going to take my new color that I wanted and put it on this spool pin, and I take my black thread and my green thread and I hold them together, I loop them around my finger, and I tie the 2 threads together, and it makes a tiny little, knot. And then right after the knot, I leave about 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch tail, and I clip off the tail end there. Okay, and so I'm going to repeat this process for all 4 of my thread colors. So now I'm looping it around my thread guide at the top, just grabbing my red thread here, tying my 2 colors together, my black with my red, and then clipping off about 1 centimeter to 1/2 inch away from the knot. Okay, just make sure you're pulling pretty tight with your knots so they don't come out, because then you're back to square one with having to rethread. So again, hooking around the loop, grabbing your 2 thread colors, tying them off, and snipping away. And then I have one last one to do. Tying blue and black together, pulling tightly on my knot, and clipping away. Okay, so when we have all our thread colors tied off, I go down to my tension dials. So right now they're all sitting at 4s. I'm going to twirl them to a 0 because I don't really want the machine pulling on the threads too much, because again it risks the knot coming apart. So I'm telling the machine not to have any tension while I run through my new color. Okay, once I've done that, I'm just going to take a scrap piece of fabric. I always keep little squares cut up around my sergers for changing thread colors and testing the serger. Now I'm going to just run it through, and I'm going to watch carefully where my knots come on my needle threads, because ideally you do not want the knots to poke through the eyes of the needle. It risks breaking the needle. So as soon as that happens, I'll stop and just thread the 2 black threads through the eyes of the needle. So I've turned my tension discs to 0. I have a scrap piece of fabric. I have foot down. I'm going to push up my fabric. I'm going to cut a little bit off because this is a little frayed, and it's going to run through for me. And so as I watch here, I have my little black one coming through here. Okay, and so I'm going to lift my foot, and I'm just going to clip it before the knot, and the knot away here. And then you know what, I can do it if I'm doing it to the 1 needle. I'm going to clip away blue here. If you can see, I still have a little bit of blue showing. I'm going to pull it down until I see the black knot. Okay, so here's my 2 needle threads, and I'm going to just thread up my needle threads here. And I can now pull this through because it has no tension. So now you can see there's the knot where red hit black, and there's the knot where green hit black. Black has been fed through all of those intricate areas without me having to rethread. So that's a time saver. And again, if you're a beginner, no one wants to be threading up your serger each time you want to change your color. So I'm going to clip away here. So those are my looper threads threaded through. All I need to do is rethread my needles, and we will be back serging. So taking 1 needle thread, and again, when I thread up my needles, I like this just out of the way. Gives my hands a little more space. and I just poke it through. There's one needle threaded, and now grabbing my other thread and threading up my my left needle. And again, if you have a hard time grabbing the tails after you thread your needles, those tweezers really help you out. So my threads are threaded. I'm gonna just grab those tweezers and tuck them underneath the foot. So I just move the threads from my needle threads around. I lift my foot so I can tuck under all my tails, put my foot back down. And now the only thing you want to remember before you start serging now is to change those tension discs back to 4 so you get a nice serge and stitch. So once you've returned those to 4s, you can use again your sample piece. You don't need a new one. We'll just line her up so the old one cuts off, and we'll feed it through, and you'll just make sure that black is working. Again, I'm chaining off. Chaining off means leaving a stitch behind, and so you can see that suddenly my serge is all in black now. So that is the quick threading method to threading a serger.